Welcome to Let's Get Writing. I'm Catherine Musso, and it's very exciting today to have Sheila Trask here in the studio with me. And this is something I've been working on for a while, is to have a little studio here in town. We're coming to you from Grand Falls-Windsor, Newfoundland, Canada. So let us know where you're watching from. We're really excited to be sharing this with you. And let me tell you a little bit about my guest, Sheila. Sheila is a lifelong learner and educator, and she spends a lot of time reading, writing, and discovering new ways to help others reach their full potential. Are you blushing yet, Sheila? Because you are amazing. She teaches at the College of the North Atlantic here in central Newfoundland. She is a gratitude life coach, a motivational speaker, and a community activist. And she shares a passion for personal development and growth. Sheila is pretty amazing. You're the author of 2 books now, not one. I interviewed you with the first book, and now we get to have both of them here in front of us, the Gratitude Attitude, and we also now have Life Lessons from the Soul. You can correct me.
The calling of my soul.
The calling of my soul. Thank you very much. So we're going to tell you all about that. Let's start, Sheila, with talking about the 2 books and how that calling for you came to be.
To start writing?
Yeah.
Well, I initially, when I wrote the Gratitude Attitude, it started out, I was reading some assignments that some of my students had done for me as part of a project, and I could vision a book as I was reading it. I was thinking, oh, the things that they're saying, people should hear this, because it was like true life stuff. So anyway, I said to my students, how would you like me to put your stuff together in a book? And they agreed. So I said, if you are willing to let me use your work, when after you look at your grades, give it back to me. It may not show exactly as you have it, and that's when I started doing it.
Yeah, so it came from that. Well, you've been a teacher really all your life. You're still teaching through your writing. I have to say that, having read both your books, there's so much there that's, if you take the books, you can read it in one sitting, this is how I would recommend doing it, and you can recommend what you think. For me, read the book right through, and then go back chapter by chapter, because you have all kinds of prompts and questions. And I feel kind of, if you start that right at the beginning, you could be years going through the book if you wanted to be, really. You could be. You could dig as deep as you want to.
Yes.
Is that right, what I'm saying?
Yes.
Yeah.
Some people tell me what they like to do is just keep the book on the coffee table, and then they'll pick it up after they've read the book, pick it up, and then go, okay, which chapter am I going to read today? Because they know it's going to be a lesson that maybe they might need to hear that day.
And that's where intuition comes in, I think. What we know about ourselves, and when we get up in the morning, sometimes I go, what do I need to know today? I'd be inclined to pick that book up and just flick through it, and where I stop would be the chapter that I would read that day. That would be the universe telling me this is what I need. And it does work like that. And you've got a beautiful journal there as well. It's just on the table, the Gratitude Attitude.
That journal belongs to the Gratitude Attitude book.
Yeah.
So I use both of them together to teach a workshop. And people sometimes buy the journal, so they work their way through the book themselves. So it gives you the questions and gives you space to write and think. Because the books that I write are the type of books to help you grow.
Well, you're all about the personal development.
Yeah.
And that is what it's about, because I just finished the other book. And at the end of each chapter, we have questions and thoughts, and kind of a key thought that you take from the chapter, and then 4 or 5 questions. They're short, but the answers aren't necessarily going to be short, not at all. So how did you drill down and get to that point to choose the questions? And what kind of process was that for you?
Well, it's part of personal development and growth. So I think about, okay, here's the lessons in this chapter. What would someone have to ask themselves to move themselves forward? That's the question I always ask myself. So in any chapter, I highlight the lessons in the latest book, the
There you go.
Calling on
There you go.
myself. Sorry.
I don't feel so bad.
At the end of each chapter, I call it Soul Reflections,
Right.
which is like a summary of this is what I need to reflect on. Here's all the lessons you need to know. And then I have the Soul Whispers, which is really questions that you need to sit and ponder. And when you ponder them, it'll help you move forward because it leads you towards where you need to go.
Exactly, yeah. And it's a great book to have a journal with you. And I think many people these days are in touch with journaling and getting those things out of our heads and onto paper. And we know how powerful that can be once it's written down. It's an amazingly powerful way to clear your mind, to get some kind of focus on what you're doing. Often recommended. So again, my thoughts after having read it would be to have a journal that would go along with the book yourself, and just pick up a nice book that talks to you and get your stuff down in there, work your way through. There's a lot of wonderful questions, but let's go back to the new book right now, because I really want to delve into how that came together, because it features a person who was very influential in your life, and her name was Nurse Sheila. We both share a name, Sheila Byrne from Stephenville. And not only your life, she influenced the lives of a lot of people. So tell us about how this woman had an impact on your life and how it came about to write this book.
Well, she was a very kind, loving person. And when she was our school nurse, so when she would come to the school, everyone wanted to be in her lineup. It was just a thing. It was like you wanted to go to get that little bit of medicine, because she had such a loving, kind way about her that just even being in her presence for a few minutes made you feel better. And, you know, back in the time when she was actually in the school system, people weren't always really nice to you. So, you know, people were growing up, you know, back, I'm talking in the 60s and the, 70s, because she retired when she was 65. But, you know, my biggest memories of her is in my younger years, when you're just starting out and all of a sudden having someone who's not cross to you, who's not, who's very kind and gentle. And that left a really huge impression. And not only for me, for a lot of people. So when I decided, I felt like I wanted to give back to her in a way, and it was a process. And I call it the universe calling her back into my life, because that's exactly what happened. And it originated with my first book, which I didn't realize that I'm actually putting this woman back in my life, because I used an example demonstrating in my book. I used her as an example, because my life lessons from the field series is about taking real life experiences, people who share really great characteristics and do things in a certain way. And I use their examples to demonstrate theory is what I'm doing, right? To make it realistic for people so they can, easily apply it in their life and go, okay, it's not just a bunch of theory or, it's, so I take the academic part away from things. And that's why I like the whole concept of coaching and personal development. I'm an educator at heart. I love to teach people, but I like to get away from the academic stuff. I like people to see reality. And she perfectly, everything that I've learned over the last, I'm going to say at least over the last 10 years in particular, she was the person that would always come to my thoughts when I'd be learning, okay, this is the way that you're supposed to be. This is what you should be aiming to do. And I'm thinking, she was like that anyway. She was just like that. It came natural to her. So it was very honest.
Yeah. And you mentioned in the book sort of the harshness of the school system. Children are to be seen and not heard. And things were very strict back then. And schools here in Newfoundland, and I think in other provinces as well, and maybe even still in Ontario, were segregated by religion. And it kind of pitted us against, like you were on one side of that, I was on the other. We weren't in the same town, but I know what you're talking about. There was an amalgamated system, and then there was the Catholic system. And it created a lot of unusual feelings and distrust and things
Yeah.
that we just don't want. It's a much better system now.
Yes.
But within that and feeling sometimes intimidated, she was that person that was kind.
The calm amidst the storm kind of thing. Yeah.
And a lot of large families too, where you grew up, you know, people trying to manage and survive.
Yeah.
It was not a wealthy area. And after I think it was the Air Force moved out, a lot of jobs were lost. People were trying to survive day to day. And kind, loving attention to children was like, no, we need to feed you. We need to clothe you. Get to school.
Yeah.
And so I think what I gathered, she brought in that element of hearing who you were.
Yes.
And listening to you and seeing Sheila.
Yeah. She did. Yeah.
Beautiful. You know, I have to say, when I told you this, I met her. I went to school at Acadia, and her daughter was going there at the same time and was a good friend of my roommate. Somehow I ended up in Stephenville. I can't even remember how. I probably had some of her cookies.
Yeah.
I was in her house, and I remembered her. And when you told me about that, I thought, I know this woman, and I know her daughter. And there's another person you mentioned in there, Eugene White. Didn't I meet him last summer up in Moncton? Random, like just very random. And I thought, gee, I'm meant to talk to you about this book.
Yeah.
Could there be any more signs? You know, I understand. I definitely, and knowing at least one of her children, what a beautiful job she did in, you know, bringing confidence to them. And I don't know, just self-awareness, I would say. And I don't know them all, but I know one.
And, you know, she had a lot. What inspired me a lot about her was that, you know, amidst all the tragedies that happened in her life, and so quickly they happened, bang, 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 most of us would have, you know, that would have just put us in depression. Most people wouldn't come out of that, but she didn't. Like, she held strong and said, okay, what do I have to do? I have 5 children. How am I going to survive? Well, I might as well go back to work. But the spiritual side of me goes, okay, I know exactly what was going on there. The universe was calling you back to your calling. Now that's, you know, we all have a calling in life. And she was meant to be that nurse. She was meant to be that loving, kind person that was there for all the children during that time. And getting married and staying home and not being a nurse anymore, well, that wasn't her calling. Right? Like, and that's what I think. And even though I'm not trying to soften or make small of the tragedies and loss that she had, but the fact that, thank God for me and and Eugene and a lot of other people, that she actually went back to work. And
that's where the title came, The Calling of My Soul.
I actually heard it in my sleep. It woke me up in the middle of the night, because I didn't have the title for the book until, I don't know, about a year after I started working on it, because I just couldn't make up my mind. And then I woke up, I was like, calling my soul, calling my soul. And I thought, what's that all about? So then I looked it up, and I said, there's a reason. If I'm waking up with something in my head, there has to be a reason. And then when I looked it up, and I found a song that actually talked about selling your soul, you know, selling your soul for your calling. But I thought, no, she didn't sell her soul, but, you know, she did lose a lot, and she did, you know, her calling was very important to her. And, you know, it wasn't something that most of us think about, okay, what am I going to be when I grow up? For her, there was no other thought. It was like, there wasn't any thought she could be anything else. She wanted to be a nurse.
Yeah.
And she can't even remember not wanting to be a nurse.
Well, and you tell the story. I mean, she grew up in a very poor community. She didn't have a lot of resources, but she followed that. She got the education, and she worked in Ontario, and then she came back to Corner Brook, and then, you know, into Stephenville as a school nurse. And I mean, when you think about it, and the adversity that she faced, and her outlook on life. And I think that's what really comes through. You talk about how important our outlook is in life, what we think about, what we say, how we respond to things. And I think it's a huge message that comes through both your books, gratitude, but also attitude. And I love the way that you blended her stories into what you wanted to share. So how did you do it? How did you go about?
Well, initially I had to figure out what I was going to do, because I didn't plan on writing this book. This came out of my mouth. We were doing a live Facebook happy birthday 90, I don't know, 90 or 91 or something. And I went, I'm going to write a book about her. So once it comes out of your mouth, you got to do it, right?
Yeah.
But a lot of things started happening after I said that I was going to write the book. My son got really sick and everything. So I said, well, how am I going to cope with all this? Because I was working full time. And I put out a call to a whole bunch of people in Stephenville that I had on my Facebook and people that I knew. And I said, does anyone have a story that they would like to tell me about Nurse Byrne, because I'm writing a book about her? And I got lots of responses. People had a whole bunch of different quotes and sayings. And so that's why I ended up putting a lot of quotes in there and just saying student, because the consistency, like I could not believe it. These people weren't really even connected. And I was getting these messages and people were having the same type of response. They all talked about how she listened, how she cared, how you felt so good just being in her presence. That was just this consistent theme. And what was important to me was that I had learned it's not what you do, it's how you do it that counts. Everything in life, that's the bottom line. And I kept thinking, that's what made her different. Wasn't what everybody else wasn't doing or whatever. It was how she did. Everything she did it lovingly, with a kind heart. And it always made me stop and think, okay, can I be more like her? And she helped me understand my mother a lot. And I mentioned that in my book. And because they were born only a few years apart, but they had such different lives. And my mother wanted to be a nurse, but she spent her entire life. Nurse Sheila Byrne was raised in a family where, they were encouraging her in terms of education and enabled her to go on and do whatever. Whereas my mother, at the age of 14, it was like, you got to go somewhere. We don't care where you go, but go, because we can't afford to feed you, because they were so poor, right? So I can't imagine, so my mother also moved to Corner Brook, and she was a serving girl. And then she moved to Stephenville when the base was on the go. And she was actually a serving girl for this, I think they were a Jewish family. And my father was a guest for dinner. And that's how they met.
Oh, really?
And then,
Crazy.
So it's like, okay, so how come she was like this and she wasn't like that? And then it all started to make sense to me. The more I learned that, the way we grow up very much influences who we become.
Yeah. And back then, it was very uncommon for women to be working. And then the job choices were, secretary, it's even
hairdressing,
just
certain,
clerk. Like there was no one ever saying, well, you should be a lawyer, you should be a nurse, you should be a doctor. And so I'm so glad that that's changed. That we are encouraging women to reach their full potential. And in some ways, I think she was a shining example at a time when it didn't exist. How did her family feel about this when you brought forth your idea? Were they supportive? Were they nervous?
Yeah, well, I didn't really get to talk to all of them in the beginning. Maureen was very supportive. And then later, some of them came on, but there was so much going on, because Nurse Byrne had dementia. And they're a very private family. And I think that was all part of my challenge, because I didn't want to betray any of their confidence. I didn't want them to feel fearful that I was going to, because I knew that Nurse Byrne was she was very proud, but very graceful woman. And nobody, I know the way she raised her family, because nobody ever knew that, she was raising her children on her own, a single mother in a time when nobody's a single mother, right? First thing you do is go find yourself another husband, right, to support you. And so she was very different in that, so it was very quiet. It was very subtle. And it was only when I went to visit her at one point that I realized that what I really had to do was just take the book and put it into my life lessons from the field series and just share stories without getting too personal. So that's why there's a lot of a lot of me in the book as well, because as you know, when you write, especially when you write the type of stuff that I do, you have to be really vulnerable. So I was always like, oh my, are the teachers going to be mad at me for talking about what was going on in the school when I was a kid? And so I had to play with all that.
There were some tough issues in there that you brought to light.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
there was a lot of things going on. And to be honest with you, it was a very difficult book for me to write, because it was very personal, and I was determined. And she was still alive when I started doing all this. And I did want her to hold the book in her hand, but I started to realize that wasn't the issue. And when she actually died, I wrote more of the book, and I changed a bunch of things, and it's like things started coming together. And
that's the part where you reference, you feel like she spoke to you beyond her life.
Oh yeah,
it must have been that sort of connection that brought more strength to you.
All the pieces that came after the fact, because like she was our school nurse, but when I was at my mother's funeral and someone comes to me and goes, "Somebody's here to see you," it was like, oh my God, how sweet.
She did not forget you.
She didn't forget me, right?
She sounds like the type of woman that wouldn't forget a lot of people.
No, she wouldn't. And one of her friends told me everywhere they went, it was like going with a movie star. If they went into a coffee shop or a restaurant and people were there, it was like, she said, you'd walk in the room and people go, "Oh, Nurse Bird, how are you doing?" And they'd all start talking to her. And she said it was like, you didn't exist. And she would never not speak to people, like she never made anyone feel like, okay, I'm here to eat, go away kind of thing.
Yeah.
No,
she was gracious.
She was a very gracious lady and a very good listener.
And you spent some beautiful times with her. I know that she was in stages of dementia, but yet there were connections at times. And you took a lot of trips to see her. At that point, she was in St. John's.
We just kept, I just felt like, I'll just go wherever you want to take me. So, there was times that she knew who I was, and there was times she had no idea who I was, like the first time when I went to bring her a copy of the Gratitude Attitude. Initially, she didn't know, but she knew me when I walked in, and one of my sisters was with me, and she was so excited to see us. So it was like, I know you. And then all of a sudden it was like, she didn't know me. And then I realized, oh, she has dementia. Because, I had gone through it in our own family. So I knew, but at times she knew me and at times she didn't. But, I had been through that with my grandmother. So I kind of knew, just let's go with the flow.
Yeah. Well, you obviously did a beautiful job of that. And I think a lot of the points you've raised today, the delving into the personal aspects of your life and how hard that makes it to write a book, and people out there who are listening and thinking about this, it's doable. You've just got to take the steps and sometimes take time with it and allow things to unfold. And that's where a book like yours would come in handy, because you can actually journal and answer some of those hard questions. Sheila, before we wrap up, you've self-published. Any words of advice to people on that?
Well, I think self-publishing is really good because you don't give up your rights in terms of your book, and you're able to do whatever you want to do with it. So if you decide that you want to take it off the shelf, or if you want to do a new edition, or you'd like to reduce your price and do a special, by self-publishing you're able to do that. So you just want to be careful, if you're going to go any other route, to make sure that you know exactly what your rights are.
And certainly looking at a contract to determine that, do you own worldwide rights? For example, with Netflix and all these different businesses today, you don't know which book they might pick up. Or if you pitch it, they may want to do a movie, or you may work with them. You need to consider who owns the rights to the material worldwide today. And it might sound crazy, but you just don't know.
No, you don't.
You don't know when something like that may get pitched and may actually be made into a film or a documentary. Anything can happen. The world is small that way.
Yeah, the world is a lot smaller now. And you can sell rights to your books in certain countries, Like I noticed the other day, there was someone from Japan had commented on one of my books. and, wrote something. And I thought, oh, that's interesting.
Yeah.
Like, who would think that somebody from Japan is going to pick up my book and look at it? You don't know.
You don't know because
No.
it's out there. And once you put it out there, it's amazing.
Yeah.
So I can only just touch upon things here, but I think we've covered a lot of beautiful things about your writing and your books. If people want to know more, talk a little bit about the best way to reach out to Sheila Trask.
I have a Facebook page, and I have a page for each of my books,
Mm-hmm.
and I also have a website, which is just sheilatrask.com. And my email is my email connection is there, and it's the same thing. It's just sheila@sheilatrask.com.
Keep it simple. That's
Keep
what they
it
say.
simple.
Not hard to find it all. And
Yeah.
and those wanting to read your book, easiest way to get a copy?
It's on Amazon. I have some physical copies coming, and they're on the way actually, but they have to come from the United States. And believe it or not, COVID is impacting authors, like for physical copies anyway.
Mm-hmm.
But you can get it in Canada and get it in a couple of days if you order it from Amazon.ca. So
Perfect.
that's what I had to do.
I love it. I love it. And as you say, this has been a particularly challenging time in many, many industries, and even for book tours, authors wanting to do book tours. So we want to get on some of those virtual book tours that authors are doing so that we can just promote their books and interview them from wherever they are. And I'm so happy that you could come in here today, though. And I like this little setup.
It's
Everyone
beautiful.
out there, let us know what you think. If you'd like to be a guest here, we are in Central, but we can also do the shows online. And so wherever you are, if you're interested, just let me know, reach out, and we'll do our best to get you in on Let's Get Writing. Sheila, thank you so much.
Oh, you're
Like,
welcome.
I love seeing you, and I love reading your books. You're such a positive person.
Thanks
so much for coming in today.
Thanks.
Appreciate it.